Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future of work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And I'm joined today by Nick. Nick, can you please introduce yourself and share a little bit about what you do?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. My name is Nick Sarokhanian. I'm an attorney and a partner at the law firm of Barnes and Thornburg. I'm a commercial litigator, and I'm also the chair of our AI practice group, a multidisciplinary group formed of over 70 attorneys across the country, all working to help our clients use and harness the power of AI.
So let's talk a little bit about that. Tell me a little bit about the Barnes and Thornburg AI journey. When did you start it? What was the process? What was the policies? How did you come to where you are right now with 70 attorneys involved in this group?
Yeah, it's a great question. So many of our attorneys in our group are patent prosecutors, so they're
Mhm.
intellectual property attorneys. They're heavily involved and knowledgeable about computer science and all sorts of innovations related to software and artificial intelligence, even before generative AI became so prevalent beginning in late
Mhm.
2022. And so I joined the firm roughly a year ago. I was with another firm, and this firm, Barnes and Thornburg, had stood up a AI practice group. It was led
Mhm.
by an attorney in our DC office, and she ultimately decided to take a great opportunity to go in-house as general counsel of a nice corporation. And so there became a vacancy. And so as we were looking for members of our group who would be willing to serve in the role as chair, I raised my hand. I said, "Look, I have a lot of experience with
Mhm.
innovative technologies, whether in the legal space or otherwise. Back in the day, I was a quasi computer science degree
Mhm.
major before deciding that I wanted to change and go to law school. And so they ultimately asked me to do that. And so I've been chairing the group now for about 6 months or so.
Mhm.
And what we're really trying to focus on is bringing a whole of firm approach to helping clients that are grappling with all sorts of ideas and issues related to AI. So I don't know if you agree, but in my experience, the use cases of generative AI are nearly limitless. And I
Mhm.
think the legal issues that correspond to those are equally limitless. So it makes a lot of sense for us to have people from intellectual property, labor and employment,
Mhm.
litigation, from the commercial side on mergers and acquisitions, pretty much from all parts of our firm, come together and meet regularly and discuss ideas of how to help clients and identify
Mhm.
experts within the firm who can help with particular issues that clients are facing.
Now, as you're thinking about clients, and I want to talk about that, I want to also understand what you're doing internally as a firm
Sure.
around generative AI. So let's talk a little bit about that first, because I'm sure you're bringing some of your experience and learning to your clients. How have you started using generative AI internally within the firm? And then we'll talk about how you are applying some of that learning to your clients.
Sure. So we initially had interim guidance for our attorneys. And of course, our firm is not just lawyers. We have
Mhm.
paralegals, secretaries, business professionals, marketing professionals. So it applied to everybody within the firm. And
Mhm.
essentially, the interim guidance was we're evaluating it. We're going to come up with a policy that's going to be compliant with the attorney's ethical obligations,
Mhm.
various different constraints. But in the meantime, there was some sort of interim guidance. Now we finalized that and we've
Mhm.
promulgated our policy. And I would say that on the spectrum of policies, it's actually a very moderate, but also very accommodating and open to using the
Mhm.
technologies, subject to, ethical constraints and other smart
Mhm.
considerations. So it's essentially a whitelist approach
Mhm.
in terms of providers that are okay to use that have been deemed safe from a info security standpoint and
Mhm.
privacy standpoint. But essentially, we're very, very mindful of our ethical obligations. I know I've mentioned that like 3 times now, but that's something we take extremely seriously. So essentially, before a professional can use Gen AI tools for anything related to client work, we need to have express written consent from a client, and that's
Mhm.
pretty much
Mhm.
non-negotiable. We need to have that
Mhm.
from the client, and we have a number of clients who are okay with that. Some clients are saying we're still exploring that, it's a journey that everybody is on. So,
Mhm.
but then things for like idea generation, so long as it's not client information or confidential information of our firm, using Gen AI tools that are on the whitelist for coming up with ideas,
Mhm.
or speeding up the process of kind of rote work is acceptable and allowed. So we're using it, and on top of that, we're also doing pilots with some of the major AI providers that are focused on the law firm space. So
Mm.
without naming any names, we've done one pilot with one of the major ones. We're about to commence a pilot with another one,
Mhm.
and we have some smaller players as well that, especially given my role, will usually be funneled to me and say, "Hey, we'd like to do a demo of this thing for
Mm.
law firms." And I always like to say yes to see what's out there, and then if it seems like it's worthwhile,
Mhm.
pursue doing a pilot if we have enough people that are interested. So.
What kind of concerns did you meet? Like the term ethical concerns
Mhm.
involves a lot of things, right? So, what
Yeah.
kind of concerns did you meet within the law firm as you were starting to adopt it, and what did you do to overcome these concerns? Let's go a little bit deeper into the actual concerns.
Yeah, so the concerns are, primarily, like I'd say the best place for lawyers, as a starting point here is to look at the American Bar Association's guidance on this. And so
Mhm.
that's something that we've looked at. In a way, we have a legal system where it's somewhat fractured. You have a lot of different state or, jurisdictional bars that are going to apply to people
Mhm.
within their geographic territories. You also have things that are not necessarily binding, but are authoritative and persuasive, like the American Bar Association. So, they usually kind of take the lead in this area, and I'm not
Mhm.
an expert on, while I am ethical, I'm not an expert on legal ethics, which is like a subfield. So we have
Mhm.
people, especially from our general counsel's office, that are experts in that area, and
Mhm.
took the lead on this. So with that caveat, I'd say, what you're looking at is you really want to make sure that there's a couple of things in play. One, there
Mhm.
is a duty of a lawyer to be technologically competent. And that's kind
Mhm.
of an evolving duty because technology also evolves, and we expect that our attorneys are going to use the technology and use it competently because that's ultimately for the benefit of the client, right?
Mhm.
So that's one part. The other part, though, is primarily about client confidences. As you probably
Mhm.
know, uh, you know, even after a client is no longer a client, even if God forbid if it's an individual they've deceased, a lot of times those client confidences are going to be kept and must be kept in perpetuity.
Mhm.
There's all sorts of caveats and nuances that I'm not going to pretend to get into, but the bottom line is we have to take that extremely seriously, and we do.
Mhm.
And so the main concerns there with using large language models or Gen AI, um, that at least the ABA, and I can't speak for them
Mhm.
because I wasn't involved in drafting this for the ABA, but I think one of their biggest concerns was to what extent would the use of Gen AI expose client confidential information to the
Mhm.
world, mostly inadvertently, right? Accidentally. And I think that comes from a concern, and I'm not sure if it's an accurate conception or if it was accurate at some time, because again, the evolution of these models is happening on a weekly, if
Yeah.
not daily basis, right? But for some time, some of these major LLMs that people are familiar with may have had people opting in by default into allowing their
Mhm.
prompts to be used for training future iterations, right? And so I think that's kind of the concept, or maybe the
Mhm.
cause of the concern is like, hold on, we need to make sure that if a lawyer is using a Gen AI tool, an LLM, for
Mhm.
client purposes, they need to have that written consent. So, of course, that's what we have done, but also they say that you need to take reasonable steps to make sure that you're protecting the security and privacy of that information.
Mhm.
That's not going to be released to the public at large inadvertently. That's kind of the main two
Mhm.
things I would say. And again, I'm not an expert on those issues. I defer to our really great experts on that issue that helped contribute to our policy on that. But I would say, just to paint with a very broad brush, I think those are the kind of biggest things that lawyers need to be thinking about when using
Mhm.
Gen AI is, do I have assurances one way or the other that are reasonable to rely on that the tool I'm using is going to be secure, from an info security or data breach standpoint, where are the
Mhm.
servers located, for instance, um, you know, are there some sure assurances that I've been able to opt out and that,
Mhm.
the terms of use are going to actually cover the situation that if I put some information into a prompt that it will not be used or somehow shared either with that lab that's putting out that
Mhm.
model, or certainly some other third-party user, So those are some of the things I think, are kind of now table stakes, pretty basic stuff.
Now, starting to think about clients, you mentioned that some clients of yours are choosing to have you use generative AI, other clients are not. And of course, if clients agree to have you use generative AI, that how does that impact the business model? What's the fee structure? Like, why are clients choosing to have you use generative AI versus not? Obviously, it's going to be less expensive for them to if you do use generative AI. So help me understand that a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. That's something that is continuing to develop and evolve. Another part of that ABA model opinion that about
Mhm.
Gen AI is that it's their opinion that it is not ethical for a lawyer to bill, say, for instance, hypothetically, say it takes 10 hours without using Gen AI to do whatever given task that you're doing, and say with the use of Gen AI it comes down to 1 hour, just to keep the
Mhm.
math simple. Uh, the ethical thing to do is only charge for that 1 hour,
Yeah,
right? And not for the full 10 that it would
of
have
course.
taken, right? So that's one of the kind of bedrock principles of that policy.
Mhm.
And I was speaking earlier this week down in Dallas to a large conference, and uh, not everybody there was a lawyer. I don't think hardly any of the people in the audience were a lawyer. And so I made that example. I gave
Mhm.
a personal anecdote of, hey, this is an example of how I was able to save a lot of time doing what I consider to be lower value work so that I
Mhm.
could do higher value work, right? And they came up and it was kind of a lawyer joke. And he said, hey, well, you're a lawyer. So did you wind up charging for the full 10 hours? I said, no, of course not. Of course not. Like that's not okay. So
Yeah.
so how does it impact the business model? It's something I think a lot of people are trying to figure out. I think the promise and the
Mhm.
prospect is that you're going to start seeing more efficient lawyers doing things quicker, doing
Mhm.
it better, and ultimately, you know, bringing down the cost of legal services to their
Mhm.
clients. That's the prospect and hope. I think we're still early days, even though Gen AI has been around for a little bit
Mhm.
now. Because this is a quote, I think Casey Flaherty, who was with Lex Fusion, and they just did a merger, I think. I can't remember the name of the new company, but I think he said this on a panel that we were speaking on together about how AI or Gen AI is somewhat of a
Mhm.
ragged edge of development, and it's
Mhm.
kind of surprising to people where you would expect it to be really great at, task X, and
Mhm.
it's not. But
Yeah.
it's really great at task Y, which you didn't even really consider or
Mhm.
think. And so it's a little bit of a trial and error or exploration in
Mhm.
terms of seeing what it's really good at. So I think as a whole, especially as a profession, I think we're still in early days to figure out
Mhm.
exactly what impact it's going to have. Will it have an impact? I think yes. What extent? I'm not sure. I'm not sure anybody is. So we'll see.
So let's expand a little bit more into your clients. So right now we talked about how your clients are thinking about you using generative AI. Now, what kind of clients' issues are you seeing as the biggest ones they're grappling with?
Well, it runs the gamut. Some people are going to be really interested in using generative AI to do things like patent applications.
Mhm.
They have a certain volume of patent applications that they're going to prepare. They know roughly how many hours they'll take, how many pages they are, how much they're
Mhm.
paying outside counsel if they're using outside counsel, which many of them are. And they're trying to say, is there a way we can use this to speed that up and make it more efficient?
Mhm.
So there's people on, looking at that. There's some people that are looking at, well, I'm a heavily regulated entity. Maybe I'm in the
Mhm.
healthcare or medical device space or something. And now I've got Teams, and Teams has got this feature, or Zoom has a feature of AI transcriptions. Well, how does that impact my obligation to keep records, for instance?
Mhm.
God forbid something goes south or somebody brings a claim, and how, is this
Mhm.
going to be discoverable? Is this something that I'm
Mhm.
obligated to preserve? So it's literally everything. It sounds
Yeah.
trite to say that it spans everything, but it really does. It really is affecting almost everything. So it's things like that to,
Mhm.
some people are concerned about, well, if I use this for marketing and business development or advertising, are there any repercussions where arguably there could be some sort of IP infringement claim brought against me, copyright or
Mhm.
otherwise? So there's a lot of questions about that. Or
Hmm.
in the music or entertainment space, what impact does this have on the rights holders, or what
Hmm.
impact does this have on, maybe the music label and the value of what they
Hmm.
have acquired if it's super easy to use Gen AI to basically create something that's very similar, or maybe something that's
Hmm.
a cover of that music. What happens then? So those are just a few examples, but
Hmm.
it could be it could be all sorts of things, and I think a lot of them are, by this point in late March 2025, when we're recording this, I think a lot of people realize this is a thing. It's not all hype. It's not all
Hmm.
fad. It's not likely to go away. And to the extent we haven't incorporated it and started to use this in our business, we are feeling the pressure or impetus to do it. Now we
Hmm.
need to figure out, what's the best way to do it. And unfortunately, I don't know what your experience is with this, but I think unfortunately the devil's in the details still.
Hmm.
And I think, having talked to a lot of people, for instance, I had the privilege of this year going to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland,
Hmm.
and AI was a huge topic.
Hmm.
And sitting in the room with very high level executives and leaders of
Hmm.
business, nonprofits, government, and hearing people talk about this in a pretty frank and candid way, I heard one CEO of a major, if not big four, one of the largest consultancies, say that, you know, in their experience, only 10% of their clients so far had their data in a form or fashion where they could effectively even deploy generative AI. So,
Wow.
I think a lot of people are trying to figure this out.
Hmm.
I've been to general counsel conferences where, we're kind of talking about it frankly, and I think everybody's saying that, there's not yet a no-brainer consensus of this is the
Hmm.
best tool to use in this way, that's the
Hmm.
best tool to use in that way. Again, it's that, like what Casey said, it's a ragged edge, and I think we're all kind of still exploring it, which I got to say is tough if you're a company, big company, medium-sized company, small company, and you feel the pressure that you need to use this tool or this technology, and it's expensive to do, and it's not clear which one's the right bet. It's a tough place to be.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a tough place to be. So, what are you advising your clients to think about as they're formulating their policies? I imagine you're helping them formulate their governance policies, their legal policies. What are you advising them to think about?
Yeah, all of the above, right? So I think we
Mhm.
tell them, you want to keep it nimble and flexible enough because, again, I've said this before. I think if you tried to literally stay on top of the headlines and all the developments
Mhm.
related to AI, Gen AI, on a daily basis, that would be a full-time job, and you still wouldn't be able to do
Mhm.
it. You'd need a team of people to track it.
Mhm.
It's very dynamic, and so yeah, I think it's just to be flexible and adaptable, and with your policies. Because one of the things that you see is that a high percentage of employees are doing things on the side, right, on their
Mhm.
mobile devices. They might have their
Yeah.
own personal subscriptions. They might not, but a lot of people are starting to use it. And
Mhm.
the problem is, I think lawyers are particularly susceptible to this in terms of expecting perfection from something that's not
Mhm.
perfect. But I think a lot of companies are too, and at least maybe the
Mhm.
workforces of the companies are too. I think I saw something recently saying that a large majority, or at least a large percentage, 40, 50, 60% of employees were critical of their employer's approach and use of AI,
Mhm.
and I get that. I get that. But I also understand from advising the companies that are trying to figure this out and implement it that
Mhm.
it's not easy, it's not cheap, and it changes all the time. So it's a
Mhm.
kind of difficult thing where people want to use it, people are expecting to use it, and it's easy to have, let's just say people have a low frustration threshold.
Mhm.
They have a low frustration threshold of why aren't we already doing this?
Yeah.
My buddy over at this company or the guy that owns his own company is already doing this, and why can't we do it? I don't think it's because of Luddite approach or reluctance
Mhm.
to embrace things. I think companies are sincerely trying to do the right thing, but you also have a responsibility to use your resources in a responsible way, right? You don't want to just
Mhm.
throw money away and do pilot after pilot after pilot and spend all this money and then nobody's happy because now it's like the fourth thing that you've announced that we're going to do this thing, and there could be fatigue there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, as we finish up, what are you seeing? What do you anticipate will happen in the next couple of years with the legal field and generative AI? both internally inside the legal field and what you're advising to your clients?
Yeah, it's a good question. Kind of take it maybe the second part first in terms of what we'll be
Hmm.
advising. I think, what I like to say is, as a commercial litigator, what my bread and butter job is to represent companies against other companies, over
Hmm.
contracts, fraud, they stole our employees, they stole our trade secrets, or against the government or against individuals that are suing for, whatever product defect or negligence or whatever. But that's my bread and butter, right? And so right now, because it's still early days, unless you're involved in copyright litigation, which is kind of the tip of the spear when it comes to civil litigation involving AI, or
Hmm.
patent litigation, same thing, to the extent people are starting to say, okay, there's been infringement of our patents and everything else related to AI. Uh, just like the bread and butter commercial litigation, I'm about I'd say 2 to 3 years early to the scene of the crime. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Because I think maybe 2 or 3 years from now, what we'll see is the object of the lawsuit will be the AI technologies, right?
Hmm.
Or, hey, I hired you to deliver this AI solution, and here's 40 different ways you failed to deliver on the
Hmm.
promises you made. I want to get out of this contract. You owe me X amount of money, whatever. That sort of case, I think, is coming 2 to 3 years from now, right?
Hmm.
I don't think that's happening right now. If it is, it's not the tip of the spear like some of these other things, like the IP cases I told you about. So I think, yes, I think it's important for lawyers to get used to this technology, to learn about it. I think
Hmm.
it's good to know a little bit more than just the superficial level. So that means, understand what tokenization means,
Hmm.
understand how these algorithms work and were trained, understand, why you're going to get some of the responses you get. And the other thing is really, I think people need to get actual firsthand experience. That's the
Hmm.
major thing I encourage everybody to do, regardless of the audience. I say, if you haven't started playing with it, you need to start playing with it,
Yeah.
do it in a safe way, do it in a responsible way, go with one of the major AI labs that everyone's heard of,
Hmm.
US based, and start doing things that are mundane. Like, I'm going to go on a 3-day trip. What should I do? Ask it to do
Hmm.
that. I want to cook this and take a photo of what's in your fridge. You might be
Hmm.
surprised what it can tell you, or tell me a story about a dragon and a princess. Okay. Start to play with it so you can get an understanding of it. So I think more lawyers in the next 2 to 3 years, hopefully will become more personally familiar with the technology and more adept at it.
Hmm.
And that will help them become better at spotting issues. Hopefully, and within the legal profession, within 2 to 3 years, it's going to be more and more common, if not
Hmm.
ubiquitous. It's probably not going to be ubiquitous because lawyers are very slow to change
Hmm.
and conservative and resistant to new things, and entrenched in their ways in some way. Uh, so I don't think ubiquity is going to happen in 2 years, 3 years,
Hmm.
but hopefully it's going to be more and more commonplace to say, oh yeah, of course we use that to prepare the first draft of that demand letter. Of course we use that for the first
Hmm.
draft of this private placement memorandum. And then they're going to use your judgment, because that's the thing, right? Is people ask, is this going to replace lawyers, or is this going to replace this class of workers? And I say, well, I don't know, right? But I think it's more likely than not that it's going to free us up from kind of the mundane, less
Hmm.
valuable work and free us up for the higher value work, right? And I think the differentiating factor for attorneys is our judgment. And I think that's always been
Hmm.
the case. We've
Yeah.
always, like, look, there's going to be great writers in the media. There's going to be great writers, technical writers,
Hmm.
and engineering firms. There's great writers everywhere. Like, we're good at writing. Okay. Don't get me wrong. That's great. But what we're selling is, and all I've always been selling is our judgment, you know,
Hmm.
how to best advise, what's the best
Hmm.
course given X, Y, Z, right? And so I think that judgment's still going to be the differentiating factor. And I think
Hmm.
that as good as Gen AI can get at writing and preparing those things, it's still going to require, I think, in the next 2 to 3 years at least,
Hmm.
a lawyer with that requisite judgment to make those edits. So, like,
Hmm.
there's a long answer, probably more than you asked for. But
No.
what I like to what's come to me this past week when I was talking down in Dallas is that Gen AI is good at a lot of things and for a lot of people, but at least two categories of people that it's very good for are experts and explorers.
Hmm.
Experts would be this example. If you're an attorney, you've been
Hmm.
doing this for a long time, you ask it for a draft, you have the expertise to suss out, yeah, that's a good point, but I'm not
Mhm.
going to make that point because of judgment reasons, or that's not quite right. It's 90% right, but there's a nuance. So I'm not going to use that. Or, hey, you know
Mhm.
what? That's good. That's good. That's good. So you can quickly take that draft and edit it to something that
Yeah.
actually is usable, right? So that's the expertise thing. But I'm not expert on almost anything else, right? Like I'm not
Mhm.
expert on a lot of things. And so I think it's good for exploring, right? And
Mhm.
so one person can be expert and an explorer, but the exploring would be, look, I need a crash course on this concept,
Mhm.
I need a primer on this or that, And just to use a mundane example, like I don't know about you, but I'm fairly good at Excel, but I'm not a
Mhm.
financial analyst. I'm not a CFO. I don't live in Excel. That's not my workflow every single day of my life for the last 20 years, right?
Mhm.
So I know basically how to do some of the formulas. I know basically how to do some of these things, but sometimes I wind up saying, gosh, I really wish I could get this giant Excel to just give me this one answer so that I could go and
Mhm.
figure out who I need to sue about what in what
Mhm.
time period. That's all I need to know. I just need to know that, right? And it might have used to take me 8 to 10 hours of going and doing
Mhm.
serial searches on YouTube and on Google to try to figure out maybe this will get me halfway closer to knowing
Mhm.
how to do this one thing in Excel. Nowadays, I can just give an anonymized headers of I got A through E. I need to know how to make it tell me, this answer.
Mhm.
Boom, and it's still iterative. It's not exactly always on the first try, but I'm taking 5 minutes where it used to take me banging my head against
Mhm.
the wall for 8 to 10 hours, and getting frustrated. Now it's like, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 30 minutes at the most, and now I've got
Mhm.
the functionality out of Excel. So that's an example of exploring. And I
Mhm.
think I think it's good for people who are explorers and people who are experts. And to answer the first part of your question, which I tried to dodge about what I think is going to happen in AI in the next 2 to 3 years, it's hard to say. It's hard to say. I mean, the
Mhm.
pace of change has been so impressive. I think what we can say is it's probably going to get cheaper for the user.
Mhm.
You know, some
Sure.
people have talked about potential consolidation of the labs. That might be a thing. I think we're going to continue to see some geopolitical tensions and
Mhm.
competition and striving. Um, Probably see some more additional attempts at export controls
Mhm.
and other devices like that. And I think, the real million, I don't know, $1 trillion question, multi-trillion dollar question is about AGI. And I don't know. I mean,
Sure.
the latest I think I saw from the labs is they think it's 2026, but that came out at the end of 2024. So things may have accelerated. I don't know. We'll have to see.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Nick. I really appreciate you sharing your expertise. That was great.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Real pleasure. And if anybody wants to get in touch, the best way to find us is
Mhm.
BT Law, like Barnes and Thornburg, btlaw.com, and click on the artificial intelligence side. You'll see my face there. Email address, everything is there. Also on LinkedIn, just look up at Nick Sarokhanian.
Excellent. And thank you to the audience for checking out another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you checked out the show and leave a review. It helps others discover the show and helps us improve the show. And if you have any questions for me, email me at gleb@disasteravoidanceexperts.com.
All right. Thanks so much, Dr. Gleb. Take care.